We are multidimensional here. Good morning, afternoon, evening, ladies and gentlemen, whatever time you're tuning in the program called What's Going On allpointstv.com, and also WFOV, that's 92.1 on your dial. I want to thank Mr. Paul Herring over there that is doing an outstanding, a stupendous job of regulating the studio there at 92.1. We are the program that comes on at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're not selfish about our affiliation here at allpointstv.com because we want you to watch all the programs here. And so this program is just one of many, and want you to stay tuned to what we do here because we're trying to bring you some of the best programming that we have anywhere. You know, we are a small studio, but we are trying to develop our audience and to grow over time. And we do have some architectural plans in place to develop the studio on another level. And just stay with us as we begin to go to the next level of our development. I'm going to continue to talk about what is happening on the national level with this. I don't think you can say it's an impeachment anymore. I think you have to call it what it is. It's a coup d'etat attempt on the part of the losing party not to respect and not to accept the outcome of an election duly held on November the 8th, 2016. And this is now going on 3 years. It's really more than 3 years. As of November the 8th, it was 3 years, and we're now going into the 4th year, and the acceptance has not even come at this point. And I think we have to just kind of get used to the idea that they're not going to accept it, that this election was authentic. I don't know how you can say it's inauthentic, but they have not accepted it's authentic because the outcome was not what they had been saying it was going to be ever since the 15th of June when Donald Trump and his wife came down the escalator in Trump Tower and announced his long shot bid for the presidency and said that he was announcing for the presidency of the United States. Who could have believed that? This man had no prior political credential, had not been elected to any office in the political process. He had not come through the mayor ranks, as Buttigieg is doing right now, and had not held a national office, certainly not in the House or Representatives or the Senate, and came outside of the political process, almost coming from nowhere in that regard, and won the highest office in the country. And that's something that the politicians who think that they own that process and own the country through the process weren't willing at that time and not willing now to accept that an outsider should be inside of the governance that they think that they ought to run. And Donald Trump comes in and embarrasses them because Donald Trump is doing a good job. I mean, it has to be very galling. You know, here you are, the experts, and a person comes into your wheelhouse and wheels you out of there, and then he takes over, becomes the dominant politician in Washington, D.C., and there are the ones that were previous to his arrival, those in what is called the swamp, and that's about what it is, the swamp. And he comes in there and takes over and sets a new tone in the politics that they control, supposedly. And he's now redefining the terms of it. And because he's doing something different, he truly is making America great again. And you have to keep in mind here that when he says make America great again, that he is saying that this is not the first time that has happened, and that's true. America was great at the outset of the country because of the founding fathers of the nation who did something that had never been done before, and that was to set in motion the rule of law before government was even established by, in fact, setting conditions of the government will operate under, and then those restraints being in place before they assume the electoral office. And so therefore, we are unique in that sense. And that makes the country great at the outset because we had never had a government set up that was set up under the restraints before it was actually formed. Normally what you do is that you set government up and then you begin to assign it, and then you set the tone. The framers set the tone before they set the government up, and that is unique to the United States.
Ayn Rand makes an interesting point about how this country was started. And if you actually look at the history of Europe, for example, because most of us from European ancestry, and I just understood too. I watched the brief thing about that researcher Gates, who at that one university, he does a little brief thing about how African Americans can research, and he actually said the statistic good. He said 43% of Black Americans, African Americans, have actually European ancestry. 43%. But anyway, if you look at the European model, basically you had kings and queens. Okay, and they were nothing more than thugs. They got other thugs to work for them, and then after they accomplished a goal, they ought to divvy up the spoils, and that's what it was about. It wasn't about the common person who didn't bear arms. They were trounced on and minimalized, and the word called marginalized is an understatement. And that's how the rest of the world operated, pretty much.
Exactly.
Basically, the strongest person ruled. That they don't see the uniqueness that even somebody who just basically goes into that voting booth and punches a ticket for somebody. They never had nobody else in the world had those rights. Matter of fact, Europe started changing their model of doing things after the establishment of America.
Sure.
So they don't want to. Americans or the Europeans always say Americans are so violent. Well, Europe is nothing more than a big cemetery. You can't go anywhere. I just thought that was absurd comments. Yeah. I don't want to commandeer the show, but I mean, people just don't understand that.
Comment.
But people just don't realize what they have in their hands with the voting.
They don't,
and they don't realize that. It's like
they don't
vote or otherwise they depend on your apathy. And they depend on it because the Democrats got away with murder for years, and they would say on the campaign trail they'll tell the people they're talking to, vote for me, I'll do this. They vote for him, then poof, like Whitmer right now. Are the roads being improved? No, the roads aren't being. She fixed the damn roads, right? Mm-hmm. Well, where's that at?
Well, John, you're making some good points here. The idea of kings, the idea there was that the kings were divinely endowed with their offices so that they only had to answer to God and they didn't have to answer to their constituency. I mean, what did Louis XIV say? He said, I am the state. And so they were the embodiment of the states, and therefore the people out there, the plebeians, the peasants, even the nobles, their rights were defined by the king, and since he was the state, then all the rights of the state were embodied within the kings. And the framers came behind that model, and that model had been the one that had been followed throughout the annals of history, where it was a model different from that. And they came in and began, first of all, they tried to restrain government by just not giving it the authority to do anything. And that's what they did in the Articles of Confederation in 1781. And you can see the problem, though, over time. It wasn't apparent at the very beginning, but then there was a problem that took place 5 years later in 1786 with the Shays Rebellion. And when Daniel Shays engaged in what was a tax war, which we've been fighting tax wars ever since the country has been set up. We had a tax war in 1861 that left 700,000 people dead, 600,000 of them on the battlefield in what is called a Civil War, which was a war of Southern secession and a tax war. So we've been fighting tax wars ever since we got here. But when we had the Shays Rebellion, which was a tax war where they rose up against taxation in 1786, the central authority had been so weakened by the Articles of Confederation that it could not, in fact, do anything. And so, having fixed the problem of too much power concentrated in the central government, they had gone to the other extreme. And it was not apparent when they first did it, but 5 years into that part of the experiment, they saw that they had made a mistake. They'd gone too far with the pendulum swinging too far over to the right, where they restrain the government, which we have to do. They have to restrain government. But you restrain government to such an extent that government could not actually do anything. and therefore the arm of protection, the umbrella under which all of the states existed, the federal government could not respond to in the crises in the individual states. And the reason why you come together to set up a collective is so that the individual can be sustained in his security interests. I mean, that's why we say government up in the first place, because we're stronger as a collective than we are individually. And if you, in fact, come together collect, you can then restrain the bully, who is, in fact, larger than many of us on an individual level. And so government had been restrained under the Articles, but then the contradiction of that, where you can go too far in either one of the two directions. One, you can't let government go out of control. At the same time, you don't want to have government so immobilized and so weakened that it cannot respond to crises that affect all of the 13 colonists. So we have to then find a balance between the need to restrain government on the one hand, and then on the other hand, to allow it to act so that it can do that which is bequeathed to it to do, which is to maintain order, domestic tranquility, maintain international order, in other words, national defense, and then to arbitrate disputes within the purview of the country itself, so that when disputes come up internal to the nation, it can respond to those disputes. And therefore, how do you do that? Because it takes power to do either one of those three things. So how did you do it? And they came up with a solution that was and has been and is today the model for the world. And that is, you have to disaggregate power. You cannot, in fact, destroy power, but you have to allocate it in such a way is that the power is not allocated to the extent it's concentrated in one particular corridor of the government. And so what they did was disperse the power and put it in different corridors of the government, and then have each of those corridors of power to then check and balance the other corridors of power. I mean, when you understand what they did in that room from June 25th to September the 17th, you are, I don't know if you are, but I know I am, I'm just amazed at what they came up with. And what they came up with is a model that still stands in the world. And wherever I go, and I've been in a number of countries, wherever I go, I see wherever there's a model of government, that model is taken from the model that was established in that room, in that draft of the Constitution in that room, when they fixed the Articles of Confederation and they drafted something in its place. You might be aware of the fact that when they went there to revise the Articles of Confederation. That was a mandate they had gone to. First of all, they went to Annapolis, Maryland, in 1786, the year of the Shays' Rebellion. But they didn't have a quorum, and so they decided then, with the states that did show up, that they would call another convention. This one would be in Philadelphia. And those states that were there would then join into the larger convention to get a quorum of the states there, so they can, in fact, quote unquote, reaffirm the articles but fixing that part of it that they had seen exposed when the Shays' Rebellion occurred. Then they wanted to fix that and make sure that the government was, in fact, not restrained as it was. But they started to look at the 13 parts of it. It had 13 articles and Articles of Confederation. And they looked at all the parts of it, and they saw it was so weakened and it was so flawed that they really need to start all over again. And that what they did was to decide to they were meeting in secret, and they decided what they had to do was to, in fact, draw up a document taking in consideration what they had feared, which the government got out of control, but fix that within the context of a new document being founded that would then fix the problem of having to restrain power, at the same time letting power do what it has to do in terms of why you set government up in the first place. And they created a brilliant system. If you look at it, and if you study the Constitution, and you see how they created a model and why that model is still envied around the world, and they're using it around the world. And I've seen it in certain places where I've been, they can claim that they're not borrowing from this model, but they are borrowing from this model. It's still the envy of the world. And I said in all of them, but I'm not so sure that we are the admirers of it that we should be. We should be admiring that document more here than they are anywhere else in the world, although I do like the idea that the standard is found here in the United States, but I don't know if we really respect the standard as much in this country as they do in other parts of the world. Not that any government, by the way, is going to respect the restraints on its power, because all government wants to maintain and grow its influence, because that's what politicians do, and it does not accept restraints because it is, in a sense, speaking in the voice, even if it's in the background, speaking in the voice of Louis XIV. They are the state. We met the state, and we are, and that's us. I mean, that's the way governments are. And if you expect them to be angels, go back and listen to Thomas Jefferson, who said that if men were angels, you would not need government. And if government were made up of angels, you would not need a constitution. So you need to have the Constitution, but you need to have government also. And is that you have to find a balance between those two. You need to have something that arbitrates on your behalf. At the same time, you cannot have people, they're not angels, they're human beings, and you cannot have them just have power and they're going to use it in the will in the good interest and the will of the people. I mean, we the people, for the people, government of the people, by the people, for the people, which was said on November the 19th, 1863. I don't know how Lincoln can say these words. He's over there speaking of the battlefield in Gettysburg, which was the bloodiest battle they had in the so-called Civil War, and there is in talking about government of the people, by the people, for the people, and he's out there on the battlefield of the war with a bayonet backing up his words, and where they had, I mean, Gettysburg is a big cemetery, but but government of the people, by the people, for the people. So it's a marvelous idea. But if you institute that, that's totally different than just setting government up, because just because you set government up and it claims these things doesn't mean that it's carrying those things out. And government must be restrained, because we're not going to ever have government run by angels. And every generation must take care of that work. And if you don't take care of that work, what you have then is what we see going on in Washington right now. Because we, the people, spoke very loudly. First of all, didn't speak any more loudly on the 8th of November than they had spoken throughout the primaries, because Donald Trump set down 14 seasoned politicians in his own party. Before he got to Hillary Clinton in the general election, Donald Trump won more primaries than all the other candidates running. 14 of them, I said, were seasoned politicians. There were 16 other candidates in all, but there were 14 candidates who had once been in elective office. And Donald Trump defeated all of them before they went to the general election, where he defeated Hillary Clinton, who had been in Washington 30 years. And Donald Trump set her down. That's saying something about where the people were in 2016. They probably were there long before that. But when you give them yin and yang as their choices, then what they have to do there and what they have been doing was going, if you notice it, they're going from one party to another, trying to find an answer, but you only have two choices. Really, when you say two choices, you mean two party choices. But the two parties are the flip side of the same coin. So you have a single choice that is divided into a duopoly. so it won't look like a monopoly, but it's really the same power center talking out of different sides of his mouth, but it's to the same end, where the autocrats, not the Democrats, the authoritarians run the state. And although they don't say that, they say we the people of the United States, and say the government of the people, by the people, for the people. They say that, but what they say in the background and what they're saying to each other is that we are the state, because that's what politicians believe. So Donald Trump is in there, and he's an outsider. He's going to always be an outsider. He's not going back and get some prior political experience, then come through the ranks, then arrive in the White House. He's not going to go back over that territory, do it a different way, and then arrive there, and then meet to their satisfaction how he got to be the CEO of the nation. They're never going to accept that. And as quiet as it's kept, and it's very quietly kept, is that Donald Trump is not accepted in the Republican Party either. And I want you to go back and look at how the Democrats took over the House of Representatives, because I was watching that too. And Paul Ryan was Speaker of the House, wasn't he? Before Nancy Pelosi, the socialists, before the socialists took over in the House, and before the Democratic Party showed the socialist face, acting like Bernie Sanders was independent. He ran. He doesn't consider himself to be. Well, none of them consider themselves to be Democrats. But Bernie Sanders is not running in the Democratic Party. He's running as an independent from Vermont. But today, unlike in 2016, they all sound like Bernie Sanders. The mask, in other words, has come off. And that mask, if you take that mask off of all of them in Washington, you'll see something underneath it that is remindful of what's happening in the Democratic Party, is also in the Republican Party, not as much because they have to appeal to a different constituency. But they don't like Donald Trump inside of the power center either. And that's why the Democratic Party has a majority in the House right now. Because if you notice it, that in the Senate gains, the Republicans gained seats in the Senate. And then they lost seats in the House of Representatives, where the majority that was in the House of Representatives, they lost that in 2018. You see, that's a contradiction. Because in the states, you have the districts which make up the states. We got 14 districts in the state of Michigan. But the 14 districts are the states. I mean, the districts are the states. 14 districts make up the states in Michigan. So how is it that you have two different centers of power when you have the House gaining, in the Democratic Party, gaining seats? I think it's 239, I believe, right now. 239 Democrats in the House of Representatives. I think there are two independents, Bernie Sanders and this person that's going out of there in 2020. I don't care what they say in terms of John Amash. John Amash is going out of the 3rd district.
You mean Justin Amash?
Justin Amash.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, Justin, that's right, Justin Amash. Justin Amash is going out in the 3rd district. Grand Rapids is not going to tolerate what he's doing. And I think he sees the handwriting on the wall. They're not going to tolerate having a person get in there as a conservative and then join on with the Democratic Party and then have them gnashing their teeth because he ran under one umbrella and then he is now joined into another consortium of power in Washington, and the people there are not going to accept that. I think he sees that, and I think you'll see the results of that in November of next year. But this is what we have here. We have the Democratic Party being in control of the House of Representatives, but I can assure you, if you go back and look at the way in which that was in fact brought about, you'll see that the Democrats did not take the House from the Republican Party. It would have been the same thing in the House it was in the Senate, and that would have been the President Republican, the Senate being Republican, and the House being Republican.
Yeah, we're coming up on the 26-minute mark. We're going to lose our audience, so and then
okay. Then John just now announced that we are going to have a break taken by WFOV, and they'll be back with us after the break is over. They take a 4-minute break. Okay, and we'll continue what we're doing here, and we will try to stay around this area so when 92.1 comes back, we won't be too far removed from where they were when they left. Want to thank you for staying tuned. They're not going to tolerate this fooling the public, running under one set of circumstances and changing the name of the game once you get in there. And the Democrats were actually handed the majority in the House of Representatives. 39 Republicans did not run for re-election in the House of Representatives. In other words, they surrendered the House by not running as incumbents because, incumbents have an advantage when they run. 96% of all incumbents that run for re-election are elected to the office for which they are running as incumbents. And 39 incumbents stepped down from the House. And if it had been a matter of them standing down in order to run for other offices, that's one thing. But 26 of the 39 did not do that. 26 of them stepped down and rode off in the sunset. Paul Ryan, the Speaker, and some of the others just left the House of Representatives en masse, and then opened those seats up, and the Democrats therefore took over a consortium of seats that would not have won otherwise. And you have to ask yourself the question, I know you're very astute about this, you have to ask yourself the question, why would they do that? Why would people that are in pursuit of power, that's why they run. Why all of a sudden did so many of them decide not to continue the pursuit? But that's what incumbents is about. You continue to pursue power. And all of a sudden, they did not do that en masse after Donald Trump had been in office for 2 years. Why do you think that happened? I mean, why would 39 people of the same mindset? That's another thing. It's one thing to have 2 or 3 people not running for election, just simply stepping down. But 39, that's unheard of. To deliver the power to your political opponents. Why would they do that? It's because of what you're seeing in that impeachment process. People that hate Donald Trump more than they love the country. And there were people inside of his own party that would rather surrender the party's control of the House rather than stand behind this man. And that's what sets off the impeachment, because that's where the impeachment process takes place. You know, I keep listening to these people, and I think that what they're talking about right now is a dishonor to the framers of the Constitution, because they keep on misapplying it. I heard them asking, okay, now I want to welcome you back again to the program. WFOV, I want to welcome you back. And I had promised we would not be very far when you left, so we're not very far. We're still talking about this impeachment process, which very few people understand. And I want to try to explain some of the things that they're missing. And hopefully I can get to some of the things that I think is not in their wheelhouse, not in their purview of what the Constitution requires. Because I'm really amazed, quite frankly, that the scholars don't understand it. Because all of them are saying the same thing, making the same mistake. One person asked me on Facebook, and also one of the person I met, I ran into at the store, was coming up to me and asked me about, not asked me, but demanding the answer to what makes you so assured that you understand it better than they do, because you see they're from Harvard University, so do I know. I'm just from another place and it's not Harvard. So I'm not supposed to know anything. I wish they would challenge what I'm saying at Harvard University. Somebody will get their feelings hurt and it's not going to be me. But they came up, they come up on Facebook, and also this guy that came up to me at the store the other day. And you go read on my response on Facebook to it. I won't call the guy's name out. You can go and read his name on the air. And he wanted to know, what makes you so sure that you are the only one that understands it and they don't understand it? And here's my answer. The reason why I can say that is because all of them are saying the same thing, and none of them are saying what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is right, and what they're saying is wrong. That's why. And so I hope to clarify some of the things, some of the errors they're making. And they're making a big error in terms of trying to make the impeachment process a legal process, because then they get tripped up in terms of thinking that they have to have treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors to bring about impeachment. And that's what they're now floundering around trying to find that. That's why they had to change the language in quid pro quo. If you noticed last week, they went from quid pro quo to bribery. And that's part of their confusion. Because the Constitution says it says the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States. That language is very important. All civil officers of the United States. It establishes that the president is a civil officer. It establishes that the vice president is a civil officer of the United States. And then it says, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office. Listen to this part right here. On impeachment for and conviction of, and for the first time, they mention the words treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors, and it mentions that in Article 2, not in Article 1. Alan Dershowitz, Judge Knapp, Lawrence Tribe, and all the ones that are following that school of thought, and all of them are wrong. Because you see, and I brought this book. This is the Federalist Papers. All 85 of them are in this book here. This is called the Federalist Papers. They got it on the front cover. In the order of their importance in writing of the Federalist Papers, they got Alexander Hamilton, who wrote 51 of them. They got James Madison, who wrote 29. And they got John Jay, the lesser of the three, who wrote 5. That's 85. All 85 of the Federalist Papers are in this book, written to explain the Federalist Papers basically to New York. because they needed to have 2 states more than all the others. They needed 9 of the 13 states aboard, but they needed these 2 states, Virginia and New York in particular, because if you don't have New York, you don't have a gateway through the New England states. If you don't have Virginia, you don't have a gateway through the southern states. And so not having New York on board, the Federalist Papers are drawn up, and they're basically aimed at the constituents in New York in order to get them to understand the vested interests that were in the ratification of the Constitution, why it was in their interest to bring that about. And because they were still hesitant, they'd had this experience with King George III, they still had this reticence about setting up a strong government and why it worked the way that it worked, and they had to bring them aboard, and that's why they write it under the name of Publius, who was a 5th century politician in Rome. And all of the writers, all 3 of these writers, Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, wrote under the name of Publius, so as to remain anonymous. Like they got this guy right now remaining anonymous as a whistleblower. He's a whistleblower blowing the whistle, and then I want to be identified if they haven't done it. Why they did that in that case, though, was because they did not want to have persons taking sides based upon who they liked and who they didn't like. When they found out that Hamilton was the author of most of the documents, then of course those persons that did not like Hamilton, that might have thought he was too heavy-handed, would have then been disaffected by the writing. Then those that didn't like James Madison, same thing, and also John Jay. So they wrote it all under the same name, but 3 different writers writing the document. Now, what I can't understand about these scholars is that they rightly claim that the primary document, the primary Federalist Paper, is that talks about the impeachment process, why it is in fact constructed the way it's constructed, and why it puts the judicial power in the legislative body as far as impeachment is concerned. Why they did that is explained in Federalist Paper 65. Go read it for yourself. And I can't understand how, and I've heard Alan Dershowitz do this on the national networks, basically Fox, because CNN doesn't use them anymore because they don't like the idea of Alan Dershowitz taking a position that's not in line with being against Donald Trump being in the White House. And Alan Dershowitz, who I don't think has any moral grounding point, I think he's unprincipled. But he does, in fact, do the right thing in this case. He had the same position when they were impeaching Bill Clinton in 1998, and it's the same position right now in terms of this impeachment nonsense going on. Not so much that it was nonsense when you are lying under oath as Clinton did, but you see it's a little bit different in this case here with the president that we have today, and that is they're still searching for a crime. And I'll at the end of the program, I'm gonna give the president some advice here. I'm gonna be so presumptuous as to give the president of the United States some advice based upon the Constitution. But I don't think Alan Dershowitz is a principal is principled, because I know his background too well. And some of that may well be coming out pretty soon if they investigate thoroughly the J. Epstein case. Because I got to tell you something, you cannot have the forensics that you have in this case here and say that those findings are consistent with a person having committed suicide. You cannot even Bader, I think Bader, who is a forensic expert. I think everybody considers him probably the top of his area. I'm trying to think of the other gentleman, the one that did the forensics on the assassination of John F. Kennedy, who's also very good. But I think that they consider Bader to be even on a level above that. And Bader came out and said that he has looked at the case, looked at the X-rays, bones that are broken in the thorax area, in the trachea area. That's not consistent with what you have when you have a person that hung himself. And also the problem is, how do you create enough thrust from a bed that's 5 feet from the floor? How do you have enough velocity? And so that's a problem. And if they look into it, a lot of baggage is going to come out. That's why I don't think you're going to have them look into it, because there are too many people tied into it. And one person that's tied into it is Alan Dershowitz. I'll let you go ahead and find out what that means. But I don't consider him to be a principal person. And I don't consider him to be a constitutional scholar, because if he were a scholar, he would not be saying the things he's saying on Fox. They won't even let him talk on CNN anymore. They won't let him appear on MSNBC, because they are more in principle than Alan Dershowitz is. And I don't consider Alan Dershowitz to be a scholar of the Constitution at all, not with the statements he's making in terms of the impeachment process. You really cannot say that you need treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors in order to bring about impeachment. Not when, and I've heard Alan Dershowitz talk about the relevant Federalist Paper, which is Federalist Paper 65, and that is a relevant paper. There are 3 of them that deal with impeachment, but 65 is the most important of the 3. And you cannot have read that and see where this is written by Hamilton, and you cannot have read that where Hamilton is explaining it as a political process, and then claim that you must have these legalistic charges made in order to act in a political process. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And if you recognize it as a political process, you don't make the mistake of saying that there is due process of law that is a requirement in a political process. It will be required in the trial, because then in the trial you do have treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors if you use the process for removal. But it does not mean that the process of impeachment must be for removal. And that's the mistake that they make in terms of saying treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. That is not found in Article 1. Article 1 establishes the impeachment process. It is in Article 2 which talks about the removal. And if Alan Dershowitz had understood that, he would understand why the removal of a civil officeholder is put in Article 2, which sets up the executive branch. Article 1 sets up the legislative branch. And in the Federalist Paper 65, it places the judicial authority, that is to say, as far as the impeachment process is concerned, it sets up the judicial authority in the legislative branch. Because, and here's the because part, let me read that to you. Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. Let me read that to you. It's in the Constitution. And if they could read it, they would be able to understand it. But they don't understand it. I'm sorry to say that they don't understand it. And I listen to them, so I can hear them, because I do understand it. I'm not bragging, I'm just telling you the truth. I can tell that guy on Facebook they don't like you they want to believe in what they believe in. That's fine. I don't have a problem with that. But I'm telling you, I don't believe it. I don't have to believe it because I know it better than they know it. The reason why it is in the impeachment process is not placed in the judicial branch of government is because it was found in Article 1, Section 3, Clause 7. Let me read it to you. This is part here. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. In other words, if you use the impeachment process, that's one part of it. The process itself is one part of it. If you use the process of impeachment, which is found in Article 1, but if you use the process for the disqualification of the office holder in the office, which would be the removal part, which is in Article 2, then the consequences of that shall not extend further than the removal. Why? Because it's a political process. And if you make it a legal process, which they would have done to place it in the judicial branch, then if you then have it referred after the impeachment takes place into the legal process, the same ones who tried it in the impeachment have to try it again in the legal in the legal dimension, creating a double jeopardy issue. So therefore, the political part of the process, the impeachment, is left in the political body. And that's why it says this: judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy any office of honor, trust, or profit under the United States. But the party convicted shall nevertheless be liable and subject to indictment, trial, judgment, and punishment according to law in the judicial branch. I mean, they're in that room and they are making sure that this part of it is not contradictory to this part here. And there are absolutely no contradictions in this document, as complex as it's written. You see, what they don't understand is that and I've said this a number of times, is that the Constitution is written thematically. There are themes in it. And all the themes in the Constitution are tied together. And there's not one contradiction in language. You have to be a genius to be in a room doing that and don't have anything to go by other than what they had thrown out, and they weren't certainly to use it as a guideline because it didn't have the things in the articles that it had in the Constitution. In fact, that document was so sound and so well written, so well articulated in print, that when the southern states, 11 of them, went out to set up a confederacy, they were not setting it up to tear up the document. They wanted to perfect the implementation of the document. And the document they wrote is the same document that they had seceded from, because they were not seceded from the Constitution. Understand that. They were seceding from those who were in violation of it. And that's mindful of another article I wrote today. I wrote this article today on Facebook. I'm out in the public because I know that they're not going to challenge anything that I write. They're not going to do that. And I mention the names because I want them to know that I'm out there. We have got to look. We don't have any choice in the matter. We either return to the framers, or this experiment is over. That's the only choice you have. To remove back to those geniuses that were in that room, or if you do other than that, then this country as it's been known will not exist. Don't mean the country goes away. But what Bernie's talking about, Bernie Sanders, Bernard Sanders, what Charles Schumer, I got these names, Chuck, Jimmy, Adam. You they're your next door neighbors. What they're talking about is something different, and what they're talking about setting up is not the same thing as what the framers had set up. It is not the same thing that they're talking about that's in this document. They are not talking about embracing this document. They're talking about getting rid of it. In fact, most of them have already discarded it and do not believe in it, nor do they follow it. I want you to go back and look at what they did last week in that court where they convicted Roger Stone. Had 7 charges against this man. And he was convicted on all 7. They tell me, I read that this morning on Facebook, that, and they put the articles up there and they showed the judge. That judge is the same one that was used in the dismissal of the case against Hillary Clinton with those emails. And according to that report, this judge was in the courtroom smirking during the trial of Roger Stone. And whose crime is what? Roger Stone's crime is supporting Donald Trump. That's his crime. He is a supporter of the President of the United States. And one of the other supporters of the President was put in solitary confinement. You probably remember with Roger Stone that in pre-dawn raid of Roger Stone's house, 27 federal officers raided this man's house. You wouldn't have had 27 armed federal officers going to the home of a terrorist in that kind of show of force.
Believe me, that was all intended to show we are in charge, just like in Waco, Texas. We're in charge. And we will do anything we want to you. You have no recourse. We're the gods. You're the plebes.
We are the state.
That's what it is. And the Democrats use that at a drop of a hat.
Yeah, John, you're exactly right. They were saying that they are the state. And no one in the country and no document that is written to restrain them will in fact prevail in what they intend to do, because they are, not that they're announcing that, they're announcing something different as a way of distracting you from what they really are doing, what they're saying behind their mask. And what they're saying is they are the state, and they're acting within the purview that they are the state, and nothing else prevails over what they intend to do. Otherwise, they're not be able to do that. And I'm just waiting to see what's going to happen with the Durham report and the report that is to be put out there by Horowitz. I want to see what they do, because there is no question about the fact that the other side, the one that's not on trial, the one that's not subject to being brought before the bodies of government to be held to account, I'm waiting to see what they do with the real violations that occurred in 2016, and not this made up stuff, because the impeachment process that they're using right now against Donald Trump is not supposed to be a process that you used in looking for a crime. It is to, in fact, chastise those in power who have abused their power, and to rein them back in under control of the document to which they have pledged to uphold and defend before they assume office. You probably are aware that no office holder can actually be installed in office in Washington, D.C. until they swear. The president must swear. There are 35 words that the president must swear to after the election has taken place. The election it gives him the opportunity to become president, but the election doesn't make the person president. What makes a person president, he puts a hand on some authoritative document and pledge to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States. Let me end the program today by giving the president some advice. And I'm being very presumptuous here, but I have a lot of respect for what President Trump is trying to do. And here's my advice to the president. Mr. President, I understand why you gave your discussion with Zelensky to the American people, and you exposed a private conversation because they were trying to act as if you had done the things that Adam Schiff said you had done. You had to show that was not true. But I beg you, Mr. President, not to go and testify before the House of Representatives for two reasons. One, they're trying to trap you. The other one is that you're destroying the separation of powers in the Constitution. No committee of a part of a branch of government can order the president. The committee is a fraction of the House, and the House is only one half of the Congress. No fraction of the House, which is a fraction of the Congress, can order a whole department of government to yield, and you should not go before that committee. Okay, I'm out of here. Want you to stay tuned to all the programs here at allpointstv.com. We are the program called What's Going On. I'm George Moss. We'll see you next week. Until that time, I want you to follow your dream, because if you don't follow your dream, you'll never know what's on the other side of the rainbow.